أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. And welcome back to another episode of Living the Quran through the Living Quran. And in this series we've been going over chapter number 36, which is Surah Yaseen, also known as the heart of the Quran. Today we want to look at two very brief verses number 63 and verse number 64. And if you recall from our previous discussion, where God separated the people into the believers and to the disbelievers, and he then reminded us that he had taken a covenant with us, that we would not worship the devil, that we would not submit to the demonic temptations, that we would do our best to follow God and his injunctions. We see in the verses today, the two verses that we want to look at, we see that God will now briefly give us a outcome or a statement which he gives to the people who will be walking into the hell and whatever punishments await them in that world, in that realm to come. Before we go into further deliberation and understanding, let us have a listen to the Arabic two verses and the English translation, and then we'll come back and deliberate on these two verses for a few moments and some takeaway points that we can derive. Allah says the following in Surah Yaseen.
هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون.
This is the Jahannam you were warned against. Enter it this day because of your disbelief. When we look at the commentary, or at least one of the brief understandings that we have of this collection of verses, one of the first things that we are quick to understand, as mentioned by Shaykh Mohsin Qaraati in his Tafseer-e Noor, is this word ṣlawhā. And he mentions that this word comes from an Arabic root which means to light a fire, to kindle and to start a fire. And obviously the inherent understanding in this is not only to light a fire, but rather it is also to enter into that fire once it has been lit. And so God is showing us that this fire would be lit, and the people who are destined for that eventual outcome, that abode of the punishments of the world to come, that they will also be told to enter into that blazing lit fire. With that very brief commentary, let us spend the last few moments to better understand some of the takeaway points that we can gain from these two very brief verses of Surah Yaseen. And again, as we've been mentioning in our series, that a lot of these verses, obviously a lot of the verses in the Quran in general, but a lot of these verses in Surah Yaseen themselves, that they really call for you and I to deliberate and think about them, to, again, many times paint a mental picture for ourselves of what God is describing. And that is no different in these two verses that we have been looking at today. So some of the takeaway points that we have is that, number one, is that God has on numerous occasions given the promise of the fire of hell and the punishments of hell. However, as we see that this is something which even today the disbelievers deny. People don't want to believe in heaven and hell. They believe that this world is everything. But God makes it clear in the Quran that there is a world to come after this existence. Point number two to reflect upon is that God has completed the argument with the individuals who are bound for hell and has continuously conveyed to them the warning of the fire. Nobody can come on the day of judgment and say that they didn't know about the fire of hell. Nobody can say that they weren't aware of it, that this is something that God has told through all of his prophets. And this has continued in through the message of the final prophet Muhammad. May God's peace and blessings be upon him and his family. And last but not least, as we conclude in this very brief discussion for today, is the fact that the entrance of the disbelievers into the fire of hell will also be accompanied by them facing utter humiliation. That they will be walking, or they will be dragged into the fire of hell, as other verses speak about, in utter and abject humiliation and denigration. We pray to God to keep us away from that state on the day when we are in most in need of his mercy and pardon and forgiveness. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.